Yo, what's going on, guys? So welcome to part 1 of the toggle build mechanic in C++. I also have this tutorial in Blueprint, so if you're not a big fan of C++, then by all means go check out the Blueprint version. But anyways, without further ado, let's get right into the tutorial. Alright, so the first thing you want to do is, of course, make some new action mappings. The first one for me is going to be the interact key, and it's going to be set to E, and then from there the next one's going to be the toggle mode, and I set mine to the middle mouse button. And then I'm going to be going to the collision tab, and I'm going to be creating a new object channel to be line traced to later. And then after that, I'm going to be making a new player class and a buildable actor class, and then be setting up some initial values in there. So with that out of the way, I'm going to be jumping into the header file of the player class, and I'm going to be creating a new event dispatcher, which is just going to be one argument, which is just going to be checking if we're in build mode or not. And then from there, I'm going to be actually creating a variable for that, so we can call it in the CPP file, or more or less broadcast it. And then after that, I'm just going to be setting up some initial or some variables, which the first two are going to be for the camera component and the widget, as well, which we're going to be using a lot of in the CPP file. Then after that, I'm going to be creating a float, which is going to be for the range of the line trace, two booleans, which is of course going to be one to check if we are in the build mode, and the other one to see if we're in the interact mode, or the interact range, pardon me. And I also just added the two variables to pass in for the line trace arguments, but of course you can do that in the scope of the tick function. I mean, I just decided to do it in the header file, but of course it's all up to you. But then from there, we're going to be making 5 functions: the switch mode, on, interact, pressed, and release, and the move forward and move right, which are pretty self-explanatory. But I'll explain the switch mode and on, interact, and press and release when we get to them. But from there, I'll be jumping into the CPP file and be setting up some initial values in there. Alright, so now diving into the switch mode function. It's going to be pretty basic logic, nothing too crazy, but basically I'm just running a simple if check, essentially flip-flopping between true or false. If the build mode is equal to false, then we're going to be setting it to true, and vice versa. And from there, we're going to be grabbing the event dispatcher variable that we made, and we're going to be broadcasting that and passing the build mode variable and in as the argument. And we're going to be doing the same thing with the set actor tick enabled. So of course we're just going to be saying the tick function enabled, or we're going to enable and disable it depending, of course, if the build mode is active or not. And then we're going to also be jumping into the begin play, and we're just going to be setting the tick function to false by default. Alright, so now I'm going to be jumping into the build actor header file. I'm going to be setting up some stuff here. And the first thing we're going to be setting up is another variable for a widget. And also to keep in note, I'm also going to be creating a T subclass of type user widget as well. But that's also for that's used for one of the arguments for to actually create the widget. So just something to keep in mind as well. Anyways, moving on, we're going to be creating 4 functions. One's going to be show widget, set widget visibility, and the set actor visibility. It may seem redundant to have 2, but I tried it with 1, and it's just very I tried to get it like working, but it was just kind of like extra code, and just kind of made no sense, honestly. I might as well just make another one, because it's just kind of stupid to to run all these checks. But anyways, from there, we're going to be actually making a U function. It's going to be build complete, which we're actually going to be calling in the widget blueprint. This is kind of to replace the event dispatcher in the widget. since you can't, or at least I couldn't find a way to expose event dispatchers from Blueprint to C++. But anyways, moving on from there, we're going to be making a static mesh component. We're going to be making also a widget component, and this is actually just going to be used for the actual well, this is going to be in the 3D space, so you know, the one that actually, I guess, always looks or always faces towards the player's camera. And we're going to be having a bool to check if it's if the actor is visible or not. And basically what this is visible variable is basically checking to see if it's built or not, basically. And then the last one is going to be the material. It's going to be the finished material, actually, and it's obviously just basically as what it sounds. When the object is built, then obviously it's going to set the visible material to, or set the material to the finished material. And then after that, I'm going to be setting up some values in the CPP file. Alright, so now possibly the most important part now is actually setting up the collision for this, and we're going to be setting up the collision enabled, and it's going to be set to the query only, so the line trace can hit it. And after that, we're going to be setting the object type to game trace channel 1, which will automatically reference your what's called your new object channel that you just created. And then we want to set the all response, the response to all channels, to set that to ignore, and then make that the root component. And then now moving on to the widget component. Now we're going to be setting the widget space to screen, because if you set it to world, it doesn't exactly face the player's camera and it just looks all weird. And of course, by default, we want to set the visibility to false. And I'm going to be setting, or I'm going to be using the attach to component instead of the setup attachment like normally. And then that's because when I spawn the buildable in the map, it like the widget component spawns at the origin, just 000, instead of the actual like location of the actor itself. So that's why I had to use this to kind of like counteract that. So that's why it's a little awkward, but yeah. Alright, so now before we're moving on to the line trace, I'm just going to be making a couple local variables real quick. The first one is just going to be the start location, which is going to be the camera location. Next one is going to be the forward vector of the camera component, and the end location is going to be the forward vector times the range variable, which I'm just going to put that in the parentheses, so you know, that gets executed first. And then after that, we're going to be adding that to the start location. And then from there, it's just going to be basically a pretty simple line trace. As always, I was going to be passing in the required arguments, which, you know, the hit result, start location, the finish, and this, and of course the it's called the actual object type. It's supposed to I guess query for, I guess, and which goes back to the base actor collision what we set up there, which is that game trace channel 1, which is basically we're going to be passing that in here. So of course it'll collide with that, or you know, be looking for that. And of course for the last one is the collision query params, which we set obviously in the header file. Alright, so now we're going to be setting the interact range variable to whatever the hit result picks up, and if we are hitting a buildable actor, then we're going to run a cast to that buildable actor, and then which I will go make a variable in the header file and of the player class real quick for that. But from there, we're going to be, as I was saying, we're going to be taking the buildable and we're going to be casting it to the whatever the hit result actor is. And if that actor, obviously, of course, if the buildable is not null, then we want to call the show widget function, and we want to set the widget variable from the player class to the widget variable in the buildable class. So we have a reference of that. And then on the else statement, so if we're not looking at, or if we haven't collided with any buildable objects, then we just want to make sure, then we want to check if the widget is not null, and if it's not null, then we want to set the render opacity back to 0, because obviously we're not looking at anything, so we don't want the widget to be displayed. Alright, so now we're going to be creating a new interface, and once that gets all done and ready, we're going to be jumping into that, and we're going to be defining just one function in the header file. It's going to be the onInteract function, and it's going to have two parameters. The first one is going to be a bool, which is basically just checking if the key is held down or not, and the actual actor, the buildable itself that we're actually interacting with. Then after that, we're going to be jumping into the build actor CPP file to actually fill out those functions. So now we're going to be filling out the actual functions in the build actor class. The first one is going to be the show widget. We're going to be checking to see if the build widget exists, and from there we're going to be checking to see if the current widget exists. If the current widget does, then we're going to be setting the render opacity to basically to 1, so it can be of course visible. But if it doesn't exist, if the current widget doesn't exist, then we're going to basically create it. And that's why I was talking about that t sub class of that we need as for one of the arguments to actually create it. And then, so once we create it, we're going to be checking, of course, running a check again to see if the current widget does exist, and if it does, then we're going to be adding it to the viewport. And then, moving on from there, this one's pretty simple. The set widget visibility. We're basically just grabbing the widget component and we're setting the visibility. That's it, and then passing in the argument, and then that's it. And the next one, the set actor visibility. We're basically grabbing the variable from the class, right? The be visible variable, and basically the be visible. Obviously, of course, it's if the actor is built or not, and obviously if it is built, then we only want to toggle the widget visibility. So that's why I'm only toggling that. But if it's not built, if the be visible is false, then we want to toggle both the widget component and the mesh as well as also setting the collision, which I'm also just running a if statement in there as well. Basically, if the visible is equal to true, then we're going to be setting it to overlap, and obviously if it's not, we're going to be setting it to ignore. So and then moving on to the final one, the build complete function, which is pretty simple. We're just basically setting the be visible is equal to true, and we're setting the mesh component we're setting the the visibility to true, and we're also setting the material to the finished material, which obviously so it won't have that that clear or see-through material. It's just the regular material. And then we're also setting the collision response to the to be blocked for all channels, obviously because it's built. But yeah. Alright, so now at the top of the player.cpp file, I'm going to be creating a small little lambda just so we don't have to keep copy and pasting code. And basically what this is just going to be doing is just checking to see if the widget that we're interacting with actually does implement the interface, and if it does, or the interface obviously we just made, and if it does, then we're just going to be calling the function or executing the function, and that's obviously all going to be done in Blueprint. And so anyways, this lambda is going to be taking 3 parameters, and the 3 are going to be one's going to be a pointer to a widget, the other one's going to be a boolean to see if the key is actually held down or not, and the third one is going to be another pointer to the actual object, or the buildable object. And yeah, but then after that we're going to be working on actually filling out the player input. Alright, so this is kind of like my 3rd time actually editing this portion, but anyways, so I just want to say though real quick, this if statement, it seems redundant and it seems kind of like useless, but it's like you actually kind of have to put it in, because in a way if you like spam toggle, at least when I tried it, your game will it'll just crash. Basically, the engine will just crash. And when I left that in, it just worked. So I was like, all right, cool. So that's just kind of leaving that there. It kind of seems, of course, like redundant because well, obviously this obviously will add later on, but like right here, of course, we're making sure we're basically running a check to see if the widget's not null, and obviously we're running it here, so we're just essentially running it twice. And there's a couple places that we're running like here and stuff, but obviously, yeah, you kind of have to put that in, unless yeah, if you don't, your game will for sure crash. But well, if you like spam toggle, at least when I tried this, so that's just something to keep in mind. I just wanted to let you guys know though. Alright, so with all that out of the way, we're going to be making another actor class. This is going to be the build manager class, and obviously, as it says in the name, this is going to be managing all the buildable objects in the level. And basically, I just decided to do it this way rather than, of course, ticking every single buildable object. Rather than just doing that, I might as well just make a whole class, or I guess a manager class, to hence the name, manage all the buildable objects on the level. But anyway, so diving into the header file, we're going to make 3 things. The first one's going to be a float variable, which basically is just going to set the visible range when the player is in a certain range within the buildable object. It's going to make the 3D UI visible or not. The second one is going to be an array, which is going to get all the buildable objects in the level, and the third one is going to be the function that we're going to bind with the event dispatcher in the player class. So now we're going to be getting all the buildable objects on the level, and we're going to be storing them in that interactables array. And then from there, we're going to be diving into the build mode activate function. We're going to be looping through the interactables array. We're going to be setting the buildable objects, or the individual buildable object, the visibility, depending on if we are in the build mode, depending on if we're in build mode or not. And we're also going to be doing the same with the tick function, so we're going to be toggling it if we are in build mode or not. And then from there, we're going to be jumping into the tick function, and we're essentially going to be doing the same thing. We're going to be looping through each buildable, and we're going to be getting the distance between the player and the buildable location. And we're going to see, we're basically going to check if it's less than the visible range, and if it is, then of course we're going to show the 3D UI, and if it's not, obviously we're going to just toggle it off. But yeah. Alright, so with that all set up, I'm gonna call it here for part 1. I don't want this to get too long, but overall though, hopefully you all enjoyed this part. As always, if you have any questions or concerns or anything, just leave them down in the comments. But I will say I would prefer if you DM me on Twitter, because Twitter is just a lot more direct and you would get for sure a lot more of a faster response from me. But anyways, until then, you all take care and stay safe.